Russia continues to hammer Ukraine with air attacks. This is footage we're going to show you from Kharkiv. What you see here is the aftermath of a rocket attack on a civilian industrial building. It comes one day after Russia attacked Kyiv with a swarm of drones. Western partners are rushing advanced air defense equipment to Ukraine to better protect civilians and critical infrastructure. Despite the relentless air attacks, Ukraine says it believes it's now winning the war. But senior officials are warning Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing a major offensive in the new year. Andriy Shevchenko is a former Ukrainian ambassador to Canada. He now runs the Ukraine Media Center in Kyiv. Roman Waschuk is a former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine. He's now Ukraine's business ombudsman. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining me.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Andriy Shevchenko, it's been a few months since you were last on this show. How is life in Kyiv right now? How are you and your family doing?
Well, it's darker than usual, and it's colder inside of our homes. But there is even more determination on the ground to win this war and to put an end to this crazy regime in Moscow. And just to give you an idea what the life is like these days, this is the schedule of electricity outrages, and it means that every day we have between 4 to 6 hours of electricity granted, and all the rest depends on how lucky you are and how much electricity is consumed by the rest of the country. So that means that you have to take 1 million everyday decisions under very surreal circumstances, and we understand that this is just the beginning of the winter.
Well, we're very grateful you used some of that electricity time to speak with us today and share some of your story with us. And Roman Waschuk, just to follow up on that, Russia is targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure in a lot of ways, routinely knocking out power in huge chunks of the country. I mean, what do you think Putin is trying to do with this tactic?
He's trying to grind down public will, which is not working, and he's trying to destroy Ukraine's economy, where it's having an impact, but Ukrainians are extremely resilient. I mean, I've just been talking to Ukrainian business because that's what I do these days, and all of them have invested in generators. Ukraine has been importing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of generators. The EU's been quite generous in providing equipment as well as transformers. So Ukrainian economic production was actually bouncing back until October, but it hasn't plummeted. It's simply stalled in terms of coming back. So extremely resilient.
So Andriy Shevchenko trying to grind down Ukrainian resistance with this tactic. You mentioned it's colder inside, and when you've got to worry about basics like heat and electricity, that can hamper military resistance. What impact is this happening on Ukraine's resistance to Russia's invasion?
Well, I can give you one example. I remember this one particular day in October when the Russians sent about 100 missiles and drones into our electricity infrastructure. That was a very difficult day, blackouts all over the country. On that one single day, the Ukrainians donated more than 300 million Ukrainian hryvnias, individual donations, to the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians cut electricity usage by 25%. And that kind of shows you the spirit here and shows you how we see these things interconnected. So if Putin thinks that if he hopes to break our will, that works quite the opposite way. We know that we are going to see very tough days and nights ahead of us. I just checked the weather forecast for Kyiv. For the next 2 weeks, we'll have 14 days in a row of temperatures below zero, and that's the first 14 days of that kind, and that's just beginning of the winter. But again, if this is what we need to go through to win this war, we will do that.
Well, you mentioned that how Ukrainians have shown resolve in the face of this. International leaders have promised another $1 billion in aid for Ukraine at a summit in Paris, specifically for repairing electricity grids, water systems, roads, and health centers. Mr. Shevchenko, is Ukraine getting enough support to deal with the cold weather in the short term, beyond that longer-term rebuilding?
Yes and no. There is never enough, especially we understand that we have not seen the worst time of the year yet. And I'm absolutely sure that we'll see more Russian attacks on our infrastructure. But I think we all understand that the only efficient way to stop all this is to make sure that Ukraine has enough weapons to defend itself. We're talking specifically about our air defense facilities. And we know that there is some help which on the way. We hope to see it as soon as possible. And going back to a question, we don't see enough of that sort of support. And that is very crucial. It's a matter of life and death for many people.
Roman Waschuk, that same question to you. There's weapons, and then there's winter being used as a weapon. And do you think that the international community is responded enough to the needs of Ukraine to deal with the challenges the cold winter is going to create?
You know, the challenges are quite diverse, as Andriy has said. I've seen some chat groups of Ukrainians saying, stop with the generators already. Although, again, I think from an individual business point of view, individual household point of view, very useful. What they're trying to focus on more is the transformers, because these are quite specialized parts that need to be replaced. Ukraine has a grid that is, like many countries' grids, old. And so fixing it is a major technical challenge when you can even source the parts. So there's much more to be done. And I think agreement that a kind of complacency had set in on the weapons side. I think that, you know, just enough was being given so that Ukraine could defend itself and maybe take a little land back, but concerned about not sending too much so as not to really get the Russians upset. And I think some of the signals we're hearing from Ukrainian commanders, from President Zelensky, is that they feel that complacency is not warranted.
Well, Mr. Shevchenko, on that point, we've seen reports and heard commentary from the defense minister in Ukraine about Russia regrouping for maybe a major ground offensive sometime in the new year, maybe as soon as February, that about a half of the conscripts they've called up have been kept back to train for potentially a new offensive coming maybe in February. What does that tell you about Vladimir Putin's endgame here, or his next steps at least?
Well, I think it's important to understand the numbers. Putin has mobilized up to 300,000 of conscripts, and we suppose that they will need between 2 and 4 months of training to be initially prepared for fighting. And we should realize that Putin has done that, and he risked his reputation at home and his domestic support, not just for a drill or for exercise. Of course, he's going to use those new conscripts against Ukraine. And also, we need to understand the geography and the weather. And in this part of the world, just like across Canada, if we're talking about January or February, that's the time when the soil is firm, and which means the troops on the ground have more mobility. So it's up to both sides in a war who is going to make the best use out of that. We are getting prepared for new Russian attacks. He is not going to stop. We know that Russia stops only where you stop them, and that's exactly what is happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, firm ground and frozen rivers as well for places where maybe bridges and causeways have maybe been blown apart. But Roman Waschuk, the same question to you. I mean, what do you take from those reports? Where do you think Vladimir Putin goes next?
Well, we're seeing again on Russian state TV pretty maximalist stuff being said. I think Mr. Gadulov, former general, now a member of the Duma, saying that Russia can only stop at the Polish, Slovak, Romanian, Hungarian border if this is to work for them. So that's not a very modest ambition. I think the Ukrainians are also preparing for what they can do when the ground truly freezes over. And I think, as Andriy has said, it's a matter of who will figure out the key to making winter work for them. I think one of the things that has changed this time compared to, let's say, previous wars when General Winter was unilaterally on Russia's side, notably against Napoleon and Hitler, is that the Ukrainian troops are quite well winterized. I mean, Canada has contributed in terms of uniforms, so have many others, and Ukraine has produced a lot of its own winter equipment. So the Ukrainian troops are probably relatively better prepared to stay warm and to keep their limbs than a lot of the mobilized Russians who have been sent in to meet a very unpleasant and uncertain fate.
Roman Waschuk.
What I hear from Ukrainian men and women, from servicemen and servicewomen, they're very grateful to Canada for these long sleeves and for this warm stuff that they're getting from Canada. So aside of weapons, aside of many other things, this is something which makes our hearts warmer.
Well, we are grateful to you, Andriy Shevchenko, for using some of your limited electricity time to speak with us. Please stay safe and stay warm. Roman Waschuk, thank you as well for joining us. Thank you both, gentlemen, for your perspective on this.